Chapter 19. Medical Experts. So long as the ordinary ideal of punishment prevails, a crime must consist of an act coupled with an intent to do the thing, which probably means an intent to do evil. This is no doubt the right interpretation of intent, although cases can be found, generally of a minor grade, which hold that evil intent is not necessary to the crime. Under the law as generally laid down, insanity is a defence to crime when the insanity is so far advanced as to blot out and obliterate the sense of right and wrong, or render the accused unable to choose the right and avoid the wrong. Of course, legal definitions of scientific terms, processes, or things do not ordinarily show the highest wisdom. It is safe to say that few judges or lawyers have ever been students of insanity, of the relation of will to conduct, or of other questions of science or philosophy. Each man confines himself to his field of operation, and the love of living does not induce him to go far from the matter in hand, which to him means the base of supplies. The insane are exempted from punishment for crime on the ground that they are not able to prepare and attend to their cases when placed on trial, and on the further ground that their free will is destroyed by disease or something else, and therefore they could form no intent. In another place I have tried to point out the fact that the acts of the sane and the insane are moved by like causes. But this is not the theory of the law. Insanity is often very insidious. Many cases are easily classified, but there is always the borderline, the twilight zone, which is sure to exist in moral questions, and in all questions of human conduct, and this is hard to settle. It is generally determined by the feelings of a jury, moved or not by the prejudice of the public, depending on whether the community has been lashed or persuaded to take a hand in the conduct of the case. Lawyers and judges are not psychologists or psychiatrists. Neither are juries. Therefore the doctor must be called in. As a rule, the lawyer has little respect for expert opinion. He has so often seen and heard all sorts of experts testify for the side that employs them, and give very excellent reasons for their positive and contradictory opinions, that he is bound to regard them with doubt. In fact, while lawyers respect and admire many men who are expert witnesses, and while many such men are men of worth, still they know that the expert is like the lawyer. He takes the case of the side that employs him, and does the best he can. The expert is an everyday frequenter of the courts. He makes his living by testifying for contesting litigants. Of course, scientific men do not need to be told that the receipt of or expectation of a fee is not conducive to arriving at scientific results. Every psychologist knows that as a rule men believe what they wish to believe, and that the hope of reward is an excellent reason for wanting to believe. It is not my intention to belittle scientific knowledge or to criticize experts beyond such general statements as will apply to all men. I have often received the services of medical experts when valuable time was given without any financial reward, purely from a sense of justice. But all men are bound to be interested in arriving at the conclusion they wish to reach. Furthermore, the contending lawyers are willing to assist them in arriving at the conclusions that the lawyer wants. It is almost inevitable that both sides will employ experts when they have the means. The poor defendant is hopelessly handicapped. He is, as a rule, unable to get a skillful lawyer or skillful experts. A doctor's opinion on insanity is none too good, especially in a case where he is called only for a casual examination and has not had the chance for long study. The doctor for the prosecution may find that the subject can play cards and talk connectedly on most things, and as he is casually visiting him for a purpose, he can see no difference between him and other men. This may well be the case and still have little to do with insanity. Experts called for the defense cannot always be sure that the patient truthfully answers the questions. A doctor must make up his mind from examining the patient, except so far as hypothetical questions may be used. In all larger cities, certain doctors are regularly employed by the prosecution. While it would be too much to say that they always find the patient sane, it is safe to say that they nearly always do. Especially is this true in times of public clamor, which affects all human conduct. A court trial with an insanity defense often comes down largely to the relative impression of the testimony of the experts, who flatly contradict each other, leaving with intelligent men a doubt as to whether either one really meant to tell the truth. The jury knows that they are paid for their opinions, and regards them more or less as it regards the lawyers in the case. It listens to them, but does not rely upon their opinions. Expert testimony is always unsatisfactory in a contested case. Under present methods it can never be any different. There is another danger. Juries do not know the difference in the standing, character, and attainments of doctors, so the tendency is always to find the man who will make the best appearance and testify the most positively for his side. This is unfair to the expert, unfair to science, and unfair to the case. The method for overcoming this difficulty that has received most sanction from students is that experts shall be chosen by the state and appear for neither side. This, like most other things, has advantages and disadvantages. State officials, or those chosen by the state, usually come to regard themselves as a part of the machinery of justice, and to stand with the prosecuting attorney for conviction. It will most likely be the same with state defenders. No one who really would defend could be elected or could be appointed, and it would work out in really having two prosecutors, one nominally representing the defense. A defendant should be left to get any lawyer or any expert he wishes. No one can be sure that the state expert will be better than the others. All one can say is that state experts may not be partisans, but in effect this would mean that they would not be partisans for the defendant. The constant association with the prosecutor, the officers of the jail, the public officials, and those charged with enforcing the law would almost surely place them on the side of the state. Such men must be elected or appointed by some tribunal. This brings them to the attention of the public and makes them dependent on the public. The expert's interest will then be the same as the interest of the prosecutor and the judge. The prosecuting attorney is not a partisan. His office is judicial. He is not interested in convicting or paid for convicting, and yet no sane person familiar with courts would think that the defendant could be safely left in his hands. Assuming he is honest, it makes little difference. Almost no prosecutor dares to do anything the public does not demand. Neither, as a rule, has he training nor interest to study any subject but the law. The profounder and more important matters affecting life and conduct are a sealed book, which he could not open if he would. Very soon, under our political system, the expert business would gravitate into the hands of politicians, the last group that should handle any scientific problem. I am free to confess the difficulties of the present system, but some other way may be even worse. It must always be remembered that this country is governed by public opinion, that public opinion is always crude, uninformed, and heartless. In criminal cases there is no time to set it right. The position of the accused is hard enough at best. He is really presumed guilty before he starts. Every lawyer employed to any extent in criminal practice knows that in an important case his greatest danger is public opinion. He would not take the officers and attachés of the court as jurors, although they might be good men, for their interest and psychology would be always for conviction. If defendants were not regarded as moral delinquents, If the examination implied no moral condemnation, if it was only a scientific investigation as to where to place him if he is antisocial, if public opinion supported this view, then experts should be appointed by the court. On this phase of the case there would be little need of experts. I would be willing to go further and say that then too the partisan lawyer, the hired advocate, should disappear. The machinery of justice would be all sufficient to take care of the liberties of every man, to give him proper treatment in disease, to restore him to freedom when safe, and when that time does come, the unseemly contest in courts will disappear, and justice, tempered with mercy, will have a chance. Chapter 20. Punishment. Assuming that man is justified in fixing the moral worth of his fellow, that he is justified in punishment for the purpose of making the offender suffer, and that these punishments, according to the degree of severity, will in some way pay for or make good the criminal act, or protect or help society, or prevent crime, or even help the offender or someone else. What, finally, is the correct basis of fixing penalties? No science, experience, or philosophy, and very little humanity, has ever been considered in fixing punishments. The ordinary penalties are first: fines, which generally penalize someone else more than the victim. These, with the poor, mean depriving families and friends of sorely needed money, and the direct and indirect consequences are sometimes small and sometimes very great. These can be readily imagined. If, instead of fines, a prison sentence is given, a sort of decimal system has been worked out by chance, or laziness, or symmetry of figures. Certainly it has been done wholly regardless of science, for there is no chance to apply science when it comes to degrading men and taking away a portion of their lives. Generally 10 days is the shortest. From this the court goes to 20, then 30, then 60, then 3 months, then 6 months, then 1 year. Why not 11 days? Why not 24 days? Why not 40 days? Why not 70 days? Why not 4 months, or 5, or 8, or 9, or 10 months? Is there no place between 6 months in jail and a year in jail? The bids at an auction, or the flipping of pennies, are exact sciences, compared with the relation between crime and punishment, and the process of arriving at the right penalty. If, in the wisdom of the members of the legislature, the crime calls for imprisonment in the penitentiary, then the ordinary sentences run 1, 2, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, and life, according to the hazard of the legislature, the whim of the court, the gamble of the jury, or the feeling and means of expression of the unthinking and pitiless crowd who awe courts and juries with their cries for vengeance. Neither does punishment affect any two alike. The sensitive and proud may suffer more from a day in jail, or even from conviction, than another would suffer from a year. The various courts and juries of the different states fix different penalties. Even in the same state there is no sort of resemblance to the punishments generally given for similar crimes. Some jurisdictions, some juries, and some courts will make these 3 or 4 times as severe as others for the same things. Some days the same judge will give a longer sentence than on other days. In this, judges are like all of us. We have our days when we feel kindly and sympathetic toward all mankind. We have our days when we mistrust and dislike the world in general, and many people in particular. Largely, the weather influences those feelings. Therefore, the amount of time a person spends in prison may depend to a great extent on the condition of the weather at the time of conviction, or when sentence is passed. The physical condition of judge or jury, and above all their types of mind, are all controlling. No two men have the same imagination. Some are harsh and cruel, others kind and sympathetic. One can weigh wheat and corn and butter and sugar. One can measure water and molasses and gasoline. When one measures or weighs, one can speak with exactness regarding the thing involved. Justice and mercy and punishment cannot be measured or weighed. In fact, there is even no starting point. The impossibility of it all makes many of the humane and wise doubt their right to pass judgment upon their fellow men. Society, no doubt, is bound by self-protection to resist certain acts and to restrain certain men, but it is in no way bound to pass moral judgments. Under any system based on a scientific treatment of crime, men would be taken care of as long as it was necessary to restrain them. It would be done in the best possible way for their own welfare. If they ever were adjudged competent to enter society again, they would be released when that time came. Neither, under a right understanding and a humane, scientific, and honest administration, would it be necessary that places of confinement should be places of either degradation or misery. In fact, the inmate might well be put where he could enjoy life more than he did before he was confined. It might and should be the case also that he could produce enough to amply take care of himself and provide for those who would naturally look to him for support, and perhaps make compensation for the injury he had caused to someone else. It is obvious that this cannot be done until men have a different point of view toward crime. In the last 100 years much has been done to make prisons better and to make more tolerable the life of the inmates. This has been accomplished by men who looked on criminals as being, at least to a certain extent, like other men. Above all, as things are now, the prison inmate has no chance to learn to conform unless hope is constantly kept before him. He should be like the convalescing invalid, able from time to time to note his gradual progress in the ability to make the adjustments that are necessary to social beings. No patient in a hospital could be cured if he were constantly told that he could not get well and should not get well. His imagination should be enlarged by every means that science can bring to the teaching of man. First of all, there must be individual treatment. No one would think of putting hundreds of thousands of the ill or insane into a pen, giving them numbers, leaving them, so that no capable person knows their names, their histories, their families, their possibilities, their strength, or their weaknesses. Every intelligent person must know that this would inevitably lead to misery and death. The treatment of men in prison is a much more difficult problem than the care of the physically diseased. It requires a knowledge of biology, of psychology, of hygiene, of teaching, and of life. It needs infinite patience and sympathy. It needs thorough acquaintance and constant attention. It is a harder task than the one that confronts the physician in the hospital, because the material is poorer, the make is more defective, and the process of cure or development much slower and not so easily seen. No person is entirely without the sympathetic, idealistic, and altruistic impulses, which, after all, are the mainsprings of social adaptation. Probably these innate feelings can be found in prisoners as generally as in other men. It is the lack of these qualities that often keeps men outside the jail. They get by where kindly and impulsive men fail. A large part of the crime, especially of the young, comes from the desire to do something for someone else, and the ease with which persons are led or yield to solicitation. The criminal has always been met by coldness and hatred that have made him lose his finer feelings, have blunted his sensibilities, and have taught him to regard all others as his enemies and not his friends. The ideal society is one where the individuals move harmoniously in their various orbits without outside control. The governing power of a perfect order in its last analysis, must be within the individual. A perfect system probably will never come. Men are too imperfect, too weak, too ignorant, and too selfish to accomplish it. Still, if we wish to go toward perfection, there is no other road. One of the favourite occupations of legislatures is changing punishments in obedience to the clamour of the public. In times of ordinary tranquillity, a penalty may even be modified or reduced. But let the newspapers awaken public opinion to crime by the judicious use of headlines and a hot campaign. Let the members feel that there is a popular clamour, and that votes may be won or lost, and the legislature responds. This is generally done without reference to the experience of the world, without regard to the nature of man, with no thought of the victim, and with no clear conception of how the legislation will really affect the public. The demand is constantly made that such crimes as kidnapping, train robbing, rape, and robbery should be punished with death, or at least with imprisonment for life. Irrespective of its effect on the criminal, what is the effect on the victim of the criminal? A man is held up on a lonely highway. The robber does not intend to kill. His face is exposed. If the penalty for robbery is life imprisonment, he kills to avoid detection. If it is death, he kills even before he robs. The same thing operates in rape, in burglary, and in other crimes. In all property crimes, not only is no killing intended or wanted, but precautions are taken to guard against killing. All laws to make drastic penalties should really be entitled "An Act to Promote Murder." Making penalties too drastic destroys the effect meant to be produced. Public clamour does not last forever. Men grow tired of keeping their tongues wagging on the same subject all the time. A state of frenzy is abnormal, and when it subsides the temperature not only goes back to normal, but as far below it as it has been above. When the fury has spent itself, jurors regain some of their human feeling and refuse to convict. History has proved this over and over again, and still politicians always seek to ride into power on the crest of the wave. When the wave moves back, they can easily go back with it. Even if the severe punishments should be continued without abatement, these soon lose their power to terrify. Communities grow accustomed to hangings. They get used to life sentences and long imprisonments, and the severity no longer serves to awe. The cruelty serves only as a mark of the civilization of the day. Some day, perhaps, a wiser and more humane world will marvel at our cruelty and ignorance, as we now marvel at the barbarity of the past. Chapter 21. The Effect of Punishment on Others. The ordinary man who hears of a crime hates the criminal and wants him to suffer. He does not picture the malefactor as a man who, for some all-sufficient reason, has committed a dreadful act. Still less does he ask, has he a father or mother, a wife or children, brothers or sisters, and how are these affected by his deed? No one can intelligently deal with the criminal without considering these. Practically no inmate of a prison stands alone. He is a member of a family or small social group, and inevitably the interests of these others are more or less closely bound up with his. If punishment is justified for its influence on society, these must be taken into account with the other members of the social organization. The criminal, it must be remembered, is almost always poor. He has a mother, brother and sisters, wife or children dependent for support, to a large extent, upon his casual earnings. He is placed in jail or the penitentiary, and the family must make new adjustments to life. The mother or wife may go to work at hard labor for a small return. The children may be taken out of school and sent to stores or factories, be condemned to lives of drudgery that will often lead to crime. The family may be broken up and scattered through institutions and the poorest shelters. A complete transformation for the worse almost always comes over the home. It is safe to say that at least 3 or 4 are closely touched by the misfortunes of every one. These lives must be readjusted, and the chances are that the new adjustments will not be equal to the old, if for nothing else than because the conviction is a serious handicap in their struggles. Let anyone go to a city jail on a visiting day and see the old mothers, the stunned and weeping wives, the little children down to babes in arms, who crowd around the corridors to get a look at the man behind the bars. To them, at least, he is a human being, with feelings and affections, with wants and needs. All of these can recount his many good qualities, which the world cannot see or know. Their first step is to borrow or to sell what they can to provide means for his defence. Everything else is cast aside. Day after day they visit the jail and the lawyer, contriving means to save liberty or life. When the trial comes, they watch through its maze in a dazed, bewildered way. They know that the man they love is not the one who is painted in the courtroom, and, at least to them, he is not. If he is convicted and goes to prison for a term of years, then month by month the faithful family goes to see him for an hour in the prison, visiting across the table in open view of guards and others as unfortunate as they. The family follows all sorts of advice and directions, and seeks out many hopeless clues for men of influence and position who can unlock prison doors. The weeks run into months, and the months into years, and still many of them keep up their hopeless vigil. Some are driven to drudgery, some to crime, some to destruction, for the man whom the state has punished, that society may be improved. It is safe to say that the state ruins at least one other life for every victim of the prison. No provision is made for the dependent families of the wretched man. Ruthlessly, society sends the man to prison and sees the daughter leave school, a mere child, and go to work. What becomes of her, it does not know or care. It seems not to know that she exists. The state sees the convict's boy working at casual tasks and growing up on the streets, while his father is paying the penalty of his act. He may, on this account, follow his father to jail. It is not society's concern. Assuming that an offender must be confined for the protection of society, as some no doubt must be, still the effect on the family and how to prevent its destruction should be among the first concerns in the disposition of the case. Chapter 22. Evolution of Punishment. Among primitive peoples, the penal code was always short. Desire for property had not taken possession of their emotions. Their lives were simple, their adjustments few, and there was no call for an elaborate code of prohibited acts. Their punishments were generally simple, direct, and severe, usually death or banishment, which often meant death, sometimes maiming and branding, so that the offender might serve as a constant warning to others. Primitive peoples early asked questions about their origin and destiny. The unknown filled most of the experiences of their lives. The realm of the known was very small. They had no idea of law and system, of cause and effect. They early began evolving religious ideas. The manifestations of nature, the mystery of birth, the fear of death, the phenomena of dreams, the growth and harvesting of crops, all of these were beyond their understanding. They peopled the earth with gods to be propitiated and appeased. Everything was the act of a special providence. From early times, religion and witchcraft furnished the chief subjects for the criminal code. The penalties for the violation of the code were always severe, generally death, and by the most terrorizing ways. No other crime could be so great as to arouse the anger of the gods, and naturally no other conduct should demand so severe a penalty as calling down the wrath of the gods. This would fall not only upon the offending man, but upon the community of which he was a part. Even as man developed in knowledge and civilization, this sort of crime continued to furnish the greater proportion of victims and the most cruel punishments. Torture of the most fiendish sort was evoked to catch offenders and extort confessions. Difference of religious opinions was the worst crime. The Inquisition became an established thing. Sometimes a nation was almost wiped out, that heretics should be killed and heresies destroyed. The heretic was the one who did not accept the prevailing faith. The list of victims of punishment on account of religion, witchcraft, sorcery, and kindred laws has in the past no doubt been larger than for any other charges. This kind of laws always called out the greatest zeal in their enforcement. To the religious enthusiast nothing else was of equal importance. It involved not only the life of man on earth, but his life through all eternity. Our statutes today are replete with such crimes, but the punishments have been lessened, and, as a rule, communities will not enforce them. But laws against blasphemy, working on Sunday, and Sunday amusements of all sorts are still on the books and enforced in some places. A large organization and an influential and aggressive part of the Christian Church are insisting that these laws shall be enforced to the limit, and that still others shall be placed among the statutes of the several states. The methods of inflicting the death penalty have been various, the favorite ways being burning, boiling in oil, boiling in water, breaking on the rack, smothering, beheading, crucifying, stoning, strangling, and electrocuting. Until the middle of the last century, they were carried out in the presence of the multitude, so that all might be warned by the example. The number of crimes for which death and bodily torture have been the punishment can scarcely be recorded, and if they could it would be of no value. They would run into the hundreds, and probably the thousands. A large part of these crimes are now obsolete. Doubtless, more men have been executed for crimes they did not commit and could not commit than for any real wrong of which they were guilty. Prisons came into fashion later than the death penalty, and as a form of punishment have gradually come to take the place of most death penalties. Prisons in the past have been loathsome places and not much better than death. Prisoners have been packed together so closely that life was almost impossible. To incarcerate victims in prisons has brought terrible punishment not only on the prisoners and their families, but indirectly on the state. No doubt through the years prisons have gradually improved. Many of their terrors have been banished. People have come to believe that even a prisoner should have some consideration from the state. Penalties have likewise grown less severe, and terms have been shortened. But this course has not been regular or constant. The public readily relaxes into hatred and vengeance, and it is easy to arouse these feelings in men, since they lie very close to the surface. A constant struggle has always been waged by the humane to make man more kindly, and yet probably his nature does not really change. A few months of frenzy may easily undo the work of years. So long as men punish for the sake of punishment, there will be a disagreement between the advocates of long punishment and short punishment, hard punishment and light punishment. From the nature of things, there is no basis on which this can be determined. The only thing that throws any light on the question is experience, and men can always differ as to the lessons of experience. Neither do they remember experience when feelings are concerned. Punishment can deter only on the ground of the fear that flows from it. Fear comes from things that are more or less unusual. Man has little abstract fear of a natural death. It is so unavoidable that it does not even figure in the ordinary affairs of life. Extreme punishments may grow so common that few give them any concern. They probably are so common now that the impression they make is not very great. Lighter and easier punishments would have the same psychological effect. In many cases, a lenient punishment would also eliminate much of the hatred and bitterness against the world that are common to all inmates of prisons. Chapter 23. Capital Punishment. The question of capital punishment has been the subject of endless discussion, and will probably never be settled so long as men believe in punishment. Some states have abolished and then reinstated it. Some have enjoyed capital punishment for long periods of time, and finally prohibited the use of it. The reasons why it cannot be settled are plain. There is, first of all, no agreement as to the objects of punishment. Next, there is no way to determine the results of punishment. If the object is assumed, it is a matter of conjecture as to what will be most likely to bring the result. If it could be shown that any form of punishment would bring the immediate result, it would be impossible to show its indirect result, although indirect results are as certain as direct ones. Even if all of this could be clearly proven, the world would be no nearer the solution. Questions of this sort, or perhaps of any sort, are not settled by reason. They are settled by prejudices and sentiments, or by emotion. When they are settled, they do not stay settled, for the emotions change as new stimuli are applied to the machine. A state may provide for life imprisonment in place of death. Some especially atrocious murder may occur and be fully exploited in the press. Public feeling will be fanned to a flame. Bitter hatred will be aroused against the murderer. It is perfectly obvious to the multitude that if other men had been hanged for murder, this victim would not have been killed. A legislature meets before the hatred has had time to cool, and the law is changed. Again, a community may have capital punishment, and nothing notable happens. Now and then hangings occur. Juries acquit because of the severity of the penalty. A feeling of shame or some bungling execution may arouse a community against it. A deep-seated doubt may arise as to the guilt of a man who has been put to death. The sentimental people triumph. The law is changed. Nothing has been found out, no question has been settled. Science has made no contribution. The public has changed its mind, or, speaking more correctly, has had another emotion and passed another law. In the main, the controversy over capital punishment has been one between emotional and unemotional people. Now and then the emotionalist is reinforced by some who have a religious conviction against capital punishment, based perhaps on the rather trite expression that God gave life and only God should take it away. Such a statement is plausible, but not capable of proof. In the main, religious people believe in capital punishment. The advocates of capital punishment dispose of the question by saying that it is the sentimentalist, or rather the maudlin sentimentalist, who is against it. Sentimentalist really implies maudlin. But emotion too has its biological origin and is a subject of scientific definition. A really sentimental person, in the sense used, is one who has sympathy. This, in turn, comes from imagination, which is probably the result of a sensitive nervous system, one that quickly and easily responds to stimuli. Those who have weak emotions do not respond so readily to impressions. Their assumption of superior wisdom has its basis only in a nervous system which is sluggish and phlegmatic to stimuli. Such impressions as each system makes are registered on the brain and become the material for recollection and comparison, which go to form opinion. The correctness of the mental processes depends upon the correctness of the senses that receive the impression, the nerves that transmit the correctness of the registration, and the character of the brain. It does not follow that the Stoic has a better brain than the despised sentimentalist. Either one of them may have a good one, and either one of them a poor one. Still, charity and kindliness probably come from the sensitive system which imagines itself in the place of the object that it pities. All pity is really pain engendered by the feelings that translate one into the place of another. Both hate and love are biologically necessary to life and its processes. Many people urge that the penalty of imprisonment for life would be all right if the culprit could be kept in prison during life, but in the course of time he is pardoned. This, to me, is an excellent reason why his life should be saved. It is proof that the feeling of hatred that inspired judge and jury has spent itself, and that they can look at the murderer as a man. Which decision is the more righteous? The one where hatred and fear affect the judgment and sentence, or the one where these emotions have spent their force? Everyone who advocates capital punishment is really ashamed of the practice for which he is responsible. Instead of urging public executions, the most advanced and sensitive who believe in killing by the state are now advocating that even the newspapers should not publish the details, and that the killing should be done in darkness and silence. In that event, no one would be deterred by the cruelty of the state. That capital punishment is horrible and cruel is the reason for its existence. That men should be taught not to take life is the purpose of judicial killings. But the spectacle of the state taking life must tend to cheapen it. This must be evident to all who believe in suggestion. Constant association and familiarity tend to lessen the shock of any act, however revolting. If men regarded the murderer as one who acted from some all-sufficient cause, and who was simply an instrument in an endless sequence of cause and effect, would anyone say he should be put to death? It is not easy to estimate values correctly. It may be that life is not important. Nature seems extravagantly profligate in her giving, and pitiless in her taking away. Yet death has something of the same shock today that was felt when men first gazed upon the dead with awe and wonder and terror. Constantly meeting it and seeing it and procuring it will doubtless make it more commonplace. To the seasoned soldier in the army it means less than it did before he became a soldier. Probably the undertaker thinks less of death than almost any other man. He is so accustomed to it that his mind must involuntarily turn from its horror to a contemplation of how much he makes out of the burial. If the civilized savages have their way and make hangings common, we shall probably recover from some of our instinctive fear of death and the extravagant value that we place on life. The social organism is like the individual organism. It can be so often shocked that it grows accustomed and weary, and no longer manifests resistance or surprise. So far as we can reason on questions of life and death, and the effect of stimuli upon human organisms, the circle is like this. Frequent executions dull the sensibilities toward the taking of life. This makes it easier for men to kill, and increases murders, which in turn increases hangings, which in turn increases murders, and so on, around the vicious circle. In the absence of any solid starting point on which an argument can be based, in the absence of any reliable figures, in the absence of any way to interpret the figures, in the absence of any way to ascertain the indirect results of judicial killings, even if the direct ones could be shown, in the impossibility through life, experience, or philosophy of fixing relative values, the question must remain where it has always been, a conflict between the emotional and unemotional, the sentimental and the stolid, the imaginative and the unimaginative, the sympathetic and the unsympathetic. Personally, being inclined to a purely mechanistic view of life, and to the belief that all conduct is the result of certain stimuli upon a human machine, I can only say that the stimuli of seeing and reading of capital punishment, applied to my machine, is revolting and horrible. Perhaps, as the world improves, the sympathetic and imaginative nature will survive the stolid and selfish. At least, one can well believe that this is the line of progress, if there shall be progress, a matter still open to question and doubt. Chapter 24. Stigmata of the Criminal. Lombroso and others have emphasized the theory that the criminal is a distinct physical type. This doctrine has been so positively asserted, and with such a show of statistics and authority, that it has many advocates. More recent investigations seem to show conclusively that there is little or no foundation for the idea that the criminal is a separate type. Men accustomed to criminal courts and prisons cannot avoid being impressed with the marks of inferiority that are apparent in prisoners. Most prisoners are wretched and poorly nourished, wear poor clothes, and are uncared for and unkempt. Their stunted appearance is doubtless due largely to poor food, the irregularity of nourishment, and the sordidness of their lives in general. One also imagines that a prisoner looks the part, and in his clothes and surroundings he generally does. It is hard for a prisoner to look well groomed. He has neither the opportunity nor the ambition to give much attention to his personal appearance. The looks of the prisoners are of little value. Nothing but actual measurements could give real information, and these do not sustain the theory of their being different from other men. It is not possible to see how the criminal can be of a distinct physical type. Criminality exists only in reference to an environment. One cannot be born a criminal. One may be, and often is, born with such an imperfect equipment that he cannot make his adjustments to life, and soon falls a victim to crime and disease. All that a physical examination could do would be to show the strength or weakness of the body and its various organs. What may befall him will depend partly on the kind and quality of his mind and nervous system, and partly on the physical structure and the kind of experiences that life holds in store for him. No doubt thorough psychological examinations would reveal something of the brain, just as physical examinations certainly would determine the strength and capacity of the body. This would be of material aid in determining the kind of environment that should be found for the individual, and if such environment could easily be found, it would avert most of the calamities which beset the path of the youth. Something can be told of a person's character from his eyes, the expression of the face, and the contour of the head, but this information is very misleading, as our everyday experience shows. It is not necessary to find stigmata in the prisoner to know that he was born the way he is. One's character must be fixed before birth, whether nature marks it on one's head or not. Likewise, every particle of matter moves from stimuli and obedience to law, regardless of whether it shows in the face or not. The strong are no more exempt from the law than the weak. All the difference is that they can longer and more easily avoid disaster. Everyone is in the habit of forming a hasty opinion of another by reading his face and noting his expression, but the indication given by facial expression is mainly the product of the life that has been lived, and tells something of the part that the hidden emotions have played on the body. It has been generally believed that mind has its seat in the brain and the nervous system. Later investigations, however, seem to show that it is the product of the whole physical organism. There is no chance to measure or weigh, or still less assay, the qualities of the machine. It is certain that the quality of the mind depends very little upon either the contour or size of the skull. About all that can be learned of the mind and the character of the man must be gathered from the manifestations of the machine. It is shown by his behavior in action and reaction. This behavior is caused by the capture, storage, and release of energy through the ductless glands. A defective mechanism, either inherited or acquired through imperfectly balanced glands, will inevitably produce an imperfect mind and defective conduct. This it will be bound to do, because the body is the mind. As a matter of fact, no man is branded physically with the mark of Cain. If criminology were so simple, it would not be difficult to handle. The manifestations of the human machine are infinite, and only patience and careful study can find the points of weakness and of strength. That all brains and bodies have both is beyond dispute. No physical human structure was ever put together where the organs were equally strong to do the work assigned to them. Some part of the body always needs watchfulness and repair, and can never be depended upon in emergencies. In times of overstress and strain, the defective organ or organs will manifest their weakness. The intricate nervous system and the brain, the unseen instincts and emotions likewise, do not work perfectly. But as a rule, the ones that underwork or overwork cannot be seen by a physical examination. It generally requires great subtlety to find them, and careful treatment and environment to make the machine work fairly well in spite of these imperfections. This could be provided. In most cases, the machine could be placed in an environment where it would work fairly well. But instead of this, all the effort that is made to keep the machine in shape is a threat of the jail if it goes wrong. It is then left to run itself without help or assistance of any kind. While examinations of the head do not show marked differences between prisoners and others, a great distinction is seen between the general proportion and the degrees of nourishment of prisoners and those not accused of crime. Nothing is more common than the weak and underfed condition of the delinquent and the criminal. This needs no expert examination. It is obvious to all. The poor, scanty clothes and personal belongings corroborate the fact that the accused is poor, and has not enough to eat or wear, nor anything but the most scanty shelter. In addition to these facts, he is almost always ill. A report recently published, based on investigations by a special committee of the New York State Commission of Prisons, shows that in the New York Reformatory only 8% passed the required physical examination. In the penitentiary, where the average age was higher, only 5% passed the test. In the workhouse, the home of the down and outs, only 1% passed. The health tests employed were those for admission to the army. It was likewise found by the same commission that of those in good health or fair physical condition, 85% were self-supporting, while only 18% of those in poor physical condition took care of themselves. Disease and ill health, when found so generally, are in themselves indications of a defective system, and such machines are constantly exposed to temptation. Their needs are ever present, and their poverty great. Sickness and disease weaken or destroy such inhibitions as the unfortunate are able to build up, and they readily yield to crime.